There's a strange feeling many men carry. Not pain, not sadness, something quieter. A sense that something important slipped away and no one noticed when it happened. You still wake up, still show up, still function, but the weight behind your presence is gone. People interrupt you more than they used to. Your effort doesn't land the way it once did. You explain yourself longer. You feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. And the most unsettling part? You can't point to a single moment where it all changed, because it wasn't taken from you violently. It was drained from you slowly. What you lost wasn't motivation, it was gravity. Men don't become powerless overnight. They become lighter, less dense, easier to move past. You feel it when your words don't stop the room anymore, when your silence isn't respected, when your presence is optional. This isn't failure, it's erosion, and almost every man feels it before he understands it. You were praised for the wrong things, for being agreeable, for being patient, for being understanding. You were told this made you evolved, mature, safe. So you learned to smooth your edges. You swallowed reactions. You delayed confrontation. You chose harmony over position. And it worked at first. People liked you. You avoided conflict. You were easy to work with. But notice something. The men who advanced weren't the most considerate. They weren't the most patient. They weren't the most understanding. They were the ones who disrupted the atmosphere. Weakness didn't arrive calling itself weakness. It arrived saying, "Be a good man." And every time you ignored your internal resistance to stay approved, something inside you stepped back. This is how power is neutralized, by rewarding men for becoming smaller. You weren't broken, you were trained. When a man removes his threat, he removes his leverage. People don't consciously decide to disrespect you. They feel it. A man who cannot disrupt has no gravity. A man with no gravity must compensate. So you start explaining yourself. You justify your decisions. You soften your tone. You offer more than necessary. You give clarity where ambiguity would serve you. This isn't politeness, it's internal bargaining. Your nervous system adapts to being overlooked. You learn to stay calm by going numb. You call it peace, but it isn't peace, it's suppression. And suppression doesn't disappear, it leaks as fatigue, as quiet resentment, as a dull sense of self-contempt you can't quite name. Power never vanishes, it turns inward and corrodes. That's why so many capable men feel exhausted for no obvious reason. They are carrying unused force with nowhere to place it. Most men sense what's wrong. They feel it when they're alone, late at night, in moments of silence, but they never name it, because naming it would mean questioning everything they were rewarded for. Silence is safer. Confusion is familiar. The moment you define the weakness, you can no longer pretend it isn't shaping your life. That's why the language around men's dissatisfaction is kept vague. Work harder, be better, stay positive. None of this addresses the real issue, because the real issue isn't effort, it's orientation. And once that orientation shifts, your relationship with the world changes permanently. You don't need more energy, you need a different position. And that's where this begins.
You were told to open yourself, to explain how you feel, to make your inner world accessible, to be emotionally available. It sounded noble, healthy, modern. But power does not survive exposure. A man whose emotional state is always visible is no longer a variable. He can be predicted, managed, timed. What can be controlled. When others know what excites you, frustrates you or wounds you, they don't need to dominate you openly. They simply wait. They let you reveal yourself. Then they move around you. Transparency was never about connection. It was about legibility. And legible men are easy men. Notice who explains themselves the most, who clarifies their intentions, who rushes to correct misunderstandings. It is never the man with authority. Containment creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates leverage. You were taught to release everything immediately and wondered why nothing you said carried weight. Validation feels harmless, encouraging even, but it trains something dangerous inside you: dependence. Every time you wait for approval before feeling solid, you hand over authorship of your identity. Your nervous system begins outsourcing certainty. You don't decide if something was right, you check. A nod, a response, a reaction. Soon, silence feels like rejection. Neutrality feels hostile. So you perform. You adjust, you refine, you seek alignment. And without realizing it, your actions stop originating from conviction and start responding to signals. Men who need approval are already owned. Power answers inward. Validation answers outward. The more you require permission to feel secure, the more exposed you become to manipulation. This is why praise is given selectively, not to reward, but to shape behavior. And once you crave it, you will betray your instincts to maintain it. Niceness removes friction, and friction is where hierarchy forms. A man who avoids tension avoids position. He delays decisions. He softens boundaries. He negotiates with his own discomfort. This makes him pleasant. It does not make him respected. People do not rise in response to generosity. They rise in response to constraint. Niceness teaches others there is no cost to crossing you, no consequence to dismissal, no risk in ignoring your limits. So they do. And you internalize the confusion. You gave more. You were fair. You were patient. Yet nothing shifted. Because power does not respond to goodwill. It responds to pressure points. Access without cost has no value. This does not mean cruelty. It means selectivity. It means not everyone deserves your openness. Not every request deserves a response. Not every explanation deserves to be given. Men who are always available are rarely taken seriously. There is an unspoken contract most men never realize they signed. Behave. Soften yourself. Don't disrupt the environment. In exchange, you will be tolerated, not respected, not followed, tolerated. This agreement is enforced socially, not violently. Discomfort, withdrawal, subtle punishment. So men adapt. They censor themselves preemptively. They smooth their tone. They learn when to stop speaking. They mistake compliance for maturity. But authority does not emerge from obedience. It emerges from detachment. The man who can walk away is the man who cannot be controlled. Most men don't lack strength. They lack internal permission to violate the agreement. And the moment you do, quietly, strategically, everything changes. The room recalibrates. Not because you demanded respect, but because you no longer negotiated for acceptance. Real power is not loud. It does not argue. It does not justify. It does not chase understanding. It observes. It withholds. It chooses when to move and when to remain still. This is why emotional men are rarely powerful. Their reactions betray them. Power requires distance from impulse. The ability to feel without displaying, to know without revealing,
to act without announcing. This is where control begins, not over others, but on what you give away. Once you stop broadcasting yourself, people lean in. Once you stop explaining, your words compress. Once you stop seeking validation, your presence sharpens. And for the first time, you are no longer easy to read, which means you are no longer easy to use.
There was a moment, quiet, gradual, when strength stopped being admired and started being monitored. Not announced, not debated, just redefined. Confidence became ego. Certainty became arrogance. Authority became toxicity. Men learned quickly, not through punishment, through correction. A raised eyebrow, a shift in tone, a sudden chill in the room. So you adapted. You diluted your certainty. You added disclaimers. You softened statements before anyone could challenge them. Not because you were wrong, but because standing firm began to feel dangerous. Power wasn't eliminated, it was reframed as a problem. And men wanting to survive socially complied. They learned to preemptively shrink. Compliance is not forced, it is trained. First, you are rewarded for cooperation. Then you are corrected for resistance. Eventually, you self-regulate. You learn when to speak, when to stop, when to defer. You are praised for flexibility, for being reasonable, for understanding the bigger picture. But notice something. The rules are never applied evenly. Some men interrupt freely. Some men ignore norms without consequence. Some men speak plainly, while others must tread carefully. This isn't hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. Institutions don't remove power, they concentrate it. They keep most men functional, productive, and restrained, while a small few operate beyond scrutiny. Obedience feels like safety until you realize it has a ceiling, and that ceiling is invisible. Power does not argue directly, it moralizes. Instead of saying, "Don't challenge this," it says, "Good men wouldn't." Instead of saying, "Submit," it says, "Be mature." Instead of saying, "Know your place," it says, "Be reasonable." Moral framing is efficient. It turns resistance into shame, and shame is easier to enforce than force. So men police themselves. They hesitate before asserting. They apologize before speaking. They soften truth to avoid being labeled. You don't need to silence a man who is afraid of being seen as wrong. This is why so many men feel internally strong, but externally constrained. They have power, but no permission to use it. Power never disappears, it relocates. When public displays become dangerous, power goes quiet. Those who hold it stop explaining. They stop justifying. They stop participating emotionally. They reveal less. They move selectively. They observe reactions more than they provoke them. Meanwhile, others are encouraged to perform transparency, to share, to explain, to expose. This creates asymmetry. One side is visible, the other is unreadable, and unreadable men always hold advantage. The more public the performance, the less real authority exists behind it. This is why the loudest voices rarely control outcomes, and why the calmest men often decide them. At some point, men realize something is wrong, and anger follows. But anger is not power. Anger is leakage. It announces dissatisfaction without leverage. It exposes wounds without protection. An angry man is predictable. He reacts, he vents, he reveals his limits. And once your limits are visible, they can be exploited. This is why controlled men outlast furious ones. Power is cold, measured, delayed. It does not explode, it accumulates. Emotion without discipline is self-betrayal. Awareness alone changes nothing. Expression alone weakens you. Only containment converts realization into control. Here is the truth few men are allowed to articulate.
You are not discouraged from power because it is harmful. You are discouraged from power because it is competitive. Power rearranges hierarchies, and hierarchies protect themselves. So men are taught to mistake restraint for virtue and submission for growth. But once you see this clearly, you cannot unsee it. You stop reacting emotionally. You stop accepting moral traps. You stop explaining your stance. You begin to move quietly, selectively, strategically. And this is where the transformation becomes irreversible. Because from this point forward, you are no longer asking for space. You are deciding when and if you enter the room at all.
Most men speak too much, not because they have more to say, but because silence makes them nervous. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty shifts power. When you stop filling space, others begin to reveal themselves. They project, they explain, they adjust. Silence is not emptiness, it is containment. A man comfortable in silence forces others to lean forward. He does not chase clarity, he allows ambiguity to work for him. When you speak less, every word gains mass. This is why powerful men pause before responding, why they do not rush to clarify misunderstandings, why they let assumptions breathe. Silence is not passive, it is compressive. It turns presence into pressure. You were taught that expressing everything was healthy. It isn't. Unfiltered expression leaks leverage. Not every feeling deserves daylight. Not every reaction deserves motion. Not every thought deserves sound. Containment is not repression, it is selection. When you contain emotion, you are no longer owned by it. You feel fully, but you decide what escapes. This changes how people experience you. They stop reading you easily. They stop anticipating your responses. They stop assuming access. A man who reacts immediately teaches others how to move him. The more you regulate your inner exposure, the more your external presence stabilizes. Calm stops being an act, it becomes your default state. Detachment is misunderstood. It is not withdrawal, it is not apathy, it is freedom from internal negotiation. Detached men do not plead, they do not convince, they do not overinvest. They act and allow outcomes to unfold without clinging. This is what makes them difficult to control. They participate without bleeding. They observe without collapsing inward. They do not need immediate results to validate their position. The man who needs nothing cannot be pressured. Detachment severs manipulation at its root. When there is nothing to threaten, no leverage exists. This is when authority becomes effortless. Access is currency. Most men give it away carelessly, their time, their attention, their emotional availability. And once access is abundant, it loses value. Strategic men ration access, not from resentment, but from precision. They do not respond instantly. They do not over-explain. They do not chase alignment. They allow absence to speak. This creates recalibration. People begin to notice your silence, your distance, your selectivity, and without confrontation, your value increases. Scarcity is not manipulation, it is positioning. When access becomes conditional, respect follows naturally. At a certain point, something shifts. You stop seeking permission, and the environment adjusts. You say less, but your words land harder. You move slower, but your decisions carry more weight. You no longer feel the urge to correct perceptions. Misunderstanding becomes a shield. This is when authority reforms organically, not because you demanded it, but because you became internally aligned. Incoherence repels power. Coherence attracts it. People sense when a man is no longer negotiating his identity. They respond instinctively. This is the final mechanism. Power stabilizes when there is no internal contradiction.
no craving for approval, no fear of rejection, no urgency to be seen. You do not rebel, you do not perform dominance. You simply become unreachable by control systems designed for reactive men. You cannot be rushed, you cannot be guilted, you cannot be baited, because nothing inside you is for sale. The most dangerous man is the one who no longer needs to prove anything. At this stage, power is no longer something you pursue. It becomes a side effect of how you exist, quiet, dense, unmovable. And once reached, it does not leave.
Most men misunderstand power because they confuse it with force. Force strains, power settles. Force needs movement, power waits. The man who rushes reveals urgency. The man who is still communicates certainty. Stillness is not hesitation, it is alignment without friction. When you no longer need to assert yourself, assertion becomes unnecessary. You speak when it matters. You move when it counts. You remain still when others expose themselves through motion. Urgency is a tell. Stillness is a signal. This is why powerful men are often described as calm, not because they are peaceful, but because nothing inside them is being negotiated. At some point, recognition stops feeding you, not because you rise above it morally, but because it becomes irrelevant. You no longer measure yourself through reaction. You no longer calibrate your worth through response. You act because the action is correct, not because it will be seen. This removes dependency, and dependency is the root of control. A man who does not need to be acknowledged cannot be dismissed. His silence does not beg. His absence does not chase. Approval is loud. Authority is quiet. When you detach from recognition, your actions compress. They gain weight. Others begin to notice not what you say, but when you choose to speak. Clarity is overrated. Clarity locks you into expectation. Explanation limits movement. When people believe they understand you, they predict you. Prediction neutralizes threat. Misunderstanding creates space. It allows you to move without resistance, to adjust without announcement, to shift without explanation. You stop correcting narratives. You stop defending intentions. Let others guess. Opacity preserves freedom. This is why powerful men are often mischaracterized and why they rarely correct the record. Being understood is comforting. Being unreadable is effective. Control systems rely on hooks: praise, guilt, urgency, fear of exclusion. These only work on men who still react. Once your inner state stabilizes, hooks fail. You are not pulled by tone. You are not rushed by pressure. You are not softened by approval. You feel emotion, but it no longer moves you. This is not numbness, it is sovereignty. The moment nothing can provoke you, everything loses leverage. At this stage, power becomes invisible but absolute. Something subtle occurs when you reach this point. People behave differently around you. They explain themselves more. They choose their words carefully. They hesitate before pushing, not because you threaten them, but because they sense limits they cannot locate. You do not confront, you do not dominate, you simply do not yield. This creates recalibration. Power reorganizes itself around men who cannot be moved internally. The final form is not dramatic, it is quiet. No need to announce boundaries, no need to assert dominance, no need to prove depth. You are no longer persuadable through emotion, no longer steerable through approval, no longer available for manipulation. You are internally closed, but externally precise. The highest level of power is being unreachable. At this point, you do not seek influence. Influence forms naturally around your stillness. And once this orientation is set,
It does not fade with circumstance. It remains calm, dense, permanent. If you feel quieter now, that is intentional. If something in you has stopped reaching outward, that is alignment. This was never about becoming more. It was about removing what made you accessible. Power was never missing. It was waiting for you to stop giving it away.